My name is Catherine Blake. I'm 34 years old, and the moment everything changed didn't sound like anything at all. It felt quiet. So quiet that if you weren't paying attention, you might have mistaken it for peace. Kyle Bennett once stood in my kitchen, leaning against the counter like he was rehearsing something, and said, "Maybe you need to step back for a while. Think about what you're risking." And I remember something inside me didn't break. It didn't even crack. It just stilled. Not anger, not panic, just clarity. At the time, I don't think Kyle understood what that silence meant, but I did. Before I met Kyle, my life had a structure I trusted. I worked in water restoration, emergency response mostly, which is a polite way of saying my phone rang when something had already gone wrong. Flooded clinics, burst pipes, systems failing at the worst possible hour. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real, and it mattered. Last year, I cleared just over 6 figures doing it, not because I chased money, but because I showed up when things broke and I stayed until they worked again. Kyle didn't live like that. He was 30, a stylist at a high-end salon downtown. His world ran on aesthetics, impressions, timing. His days were scheduled around clients, conversations, appearances, where I fixed damage. He curated perception. At the beginning, I thought the difference balanced us. Now I understand it just hid the cracks longer. We'd been together 3 years, engaged for 8 months. The wedding was 9 weeks away. At least, that was the plan. Kyle had a habit I kept trying to rename into something softer: stress, anxiety, needing reassurance. But it wasn't any of those things. It was control. He liked deadlines, but not normal ones, emotional ones. Be home by 10. Call me before you leave. If you're not here when my friends arrive, don't bother. If I have to eat alone, you're sleeping on the couch. Little countdowns. Tiny punishments, all dressed up as expectations. And for a long time, I adapted. I texted updates. I ordered food to wherever he was. I apologized for things that weren't wrong, just inconvenient, because it felt easier than conflict, because I thought that's what compromise looked like. That Friday night, a storm hit just after sunset. By 8 p.m., I was at a pediatric clinic across town. A supply line had burst behind one of the walls, and water was already spreading down the hallway. The office manager was standing there trying not to cry. They had patients at 8 a.m. the next morning. That's the kind of situation where you don't check the clock. You fix it. I texted Kyle at 8:12. Tied up at a job. I might miss the start of your sister's birthday dinner. At 9:01, I texted again. Still here, leaving as soon as we stabilize it. At 10:17, he replied. We already had to explain where you are twice. At 10:24, I typed back. I know, I'm sorry, doing my best. Then nothing. For over an hour. By the time we got the water stopped and the equipment running, my boots were soaked through, and the hallway finally looked like something that might survive the night. I stepped outside to my truck, leaned against the door, and exhaled. That's when my phone buzzed. 11:43 p.m. A message from Kyle. If you are not home by midnight, do not come back. That was it. No question. No concern. No anything human. Just terms. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I finally did. This wasn't frustration. It wasn't emotion. It was a condition. A line drawn in the sand by someone who believed love could be managed like access. Be early enough. Be obedient enough. Be apologetic enough. And you still get let in. I sat in my truck for a minute. Maybe 2. Rain tapping lightly against the windshield. My hands still damp from work. And something inside me went completely still. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel hurt. I just felt clear. I wasn't reading a message from a man I was going to marry. I was reading a decision. And for the first time in a long time, I accepted it. Not emotionally, logically. I started the engine. And I drove home. Not to make it by midnight, but to end it. I pulled into the driveway at 11:56. The house was mine. I'd bought it 2 years before I met Kyle. His name was never on anything. He moved in after we got engaged, and somewhere along the way, started acting like access was his to grant. I went upstairs, and I packed. Not fast, not angry, precise. 4 suitcases. Clothes, shoes, his salon tools, the expensive jackets he insisted needed their own space, the framed photos he liked more than I did, the throw pillows that somehow made every chair unusable, his ring light, his backup stylist kit, the planner he guarded like it held state secrets, and then the wedding binder. Thick, organized, color-coded, untouchable. I took pictures as I went. Closet, drawers, bathroom shelves, guest room, documentation, not emotion. At 12:14, I carried everything downstairs and set it neatly under the covered driveway. Dry, visible, final. I placed his house key and the gate remote on top of the binder. Then I changed the codes. Front door. Gate. Garage. Even the streaming passwords. Not out of spite. Out of closure. At 12:19, my phone lit up. Catherine, are you seriously ignoring me? I replied once. Then checked the driveway. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. At 12:31, my security camera showed his car pulling in too fast. He stepped out, still dressed for dinner, jacket slightly wrinkled, expression already halfway between confusion and anger. He saw the suitcases, stopped, looked at the door, then back at the suitcases, like they might rearrange themselves into something less real. Then the knocking started. Catherine, open the door. Pause. Catherine, this isn't funny. Louder now. Open the door right now. I stood upstairs watching through my phone, not hiding. Just done. A few minutes later, another car pulled in. His sister, Rachel. She stepped out, saw everything, and froze, one hand lifting slowly to her mouth. Good. Witnesses matter. Kyle kept shouting. That I was humiliating him. That I was ruining the night. That I was insane for taking one text literally. One text. I almost smiled at that. Because what he really meant was, he wanted the threat, not the consequence. Finally, I opened the upstairs window just enough and said one sentence. You set the deadline. I accepted the terms. The wedding is off. Rachel looked down. Kyle didn't. He just stared up at me like I had suddenly become someone he didn't recognize. And maybe I had. Kyle didn't process it all at once. You could see it happening in pieces. First, the confusion, like he was waiting for the moment the scene corrected itself. Then the anger, sharp, immediate, familiar. And then something else, something quieter, not understanding. Not yet, but the beginning of it. You're serious? He said, voice tightening. Catherine, this is insane. It was one text. Rachel shifted beside him, her eyes moving between the suitcases and the window, like she was trying to map out how this had escalated so fast. I didn't raise my voice. I know it was one text, I said. That's why this is simple. That didn't land the way he expected. Nothing about this was landing the way he expected. You're overreacting, he snapped. You always do this. Take things too literally. You know how I talk when I'm upset. I leaned slightly against the window frame, feeling the cool edge of it under my fingers. Yes, I said, I do. There was a pause, just long enough for him to think he'd regained control of the conversation. I was frustrated, he continued, softer now. You weren't there. You didn't show up for me tonight. I let that sit between us for a second. Then I said, a pediatric clinic flooded. Children have appointments in the morning. That's where I was. Rachel glanced at him. It was subtle, but it was the first crack. Kyle exhaled sharply. That's not the point. No, I said, it is. He stepped closer to the door, lowering his voice like proximity might fix something distance had broken. You're choosing your job over me. I shook my head. I'm choosing reality over ultimatums. That hit. I could see it in the way his shoulders stiffened, the way his jaw locked just a fraction tighter. Rachel spoke then, quietly. Kyle, maybe we should just... No, he cut her off. She doesn't get to do this. I watched him carefully, not with anger, with clarity. He still thought this was a negotiation. Go home, I said. Take your things. We can talk in the morning if you need closure. Closure? He repeated, incredulous. Catherine, we're getting married in 9 weeks. Not anymore. Silence. Heavy this time. Rachel looked at him again, longer now. Not confused. Thinking. Kyle laughed then, but it wasn't real. It was the kind of laugh people use when something threatens their version of reality. Yeah, you're going to regret this, he said. You're being cold, calculated. I didn't respond, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to fix how he felt. Eventually, the shouting stopped, not because he understood, but because there was nothing left to push against. He couldn't argue with a closed door. He couldn't escalate something that wasn't reacting. Rachel touched his arm. Let's go, she said quietly. He didn't move at first. Then finally he grabbed one of the suitcases, too hard, like it had personally offended him, and shoved it into the trunk. The rest followed. Not carefully, not respectfully, just removed. By the time they left, the driveway was empty again. Quiet. Just like before, but different. The next morning he came back. 1:12 p.m., not alone. Rachel again. And another woman, Monica, one of his closest friends. I had already asked my cousin, Brooke, to come over. Brooke has the kind of mind that notices details other people miss. And more importantly, she writes things down. She was sitting at my kitchen counter with coffee and a yellow legal pad when they walked in. Kyle looked tired. Not devastated. Not reflective. Just irritated. Like this entire situation had become inconvenient. His first sentence was exactly what I expected. You embarrassed me on purpose. Brooke didn't even look up. She just wrote something down. I met his eyes. No, I said. I believed you on purpose. That landed differently. Monica went still. Rachel folded her arms, watching. Kyle blinked once, then twice. You didn't believe me, he said. You took it the worst possible way. I tilted my head slightly. You told me not to come back. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? He hesitated, just for a second, and that was enough. I meant I needed you to show up, he said, to prove I mattered. There it was, not hidden, not softened, just said. I nodded once. So it was a test. He frowned. No, it wasn't a... It was a condition, I said, with consequences. Rachel's gaze dropped to the floor. Monica shifted her weight. Kyle ran a hand through his hair. You're twisting this. No, I said calmly. I'm simplifying it. Brooke finally looked up. Do you want me to document this as a verbal admission? She asked casually. Kyle stared at her. What? Nothing, Brooke said, already writing again. Kyle exhaled sharply. Oh, this is ridiculous. Then he changed tactics. Faster than I expected. I was upset, he said. You know how I get. I say things I don't mean. I didn't interrupt. I've been stressed, he continued. The wedding, work, everything. I needed you, Catherine, and you weren't there. There it was again. The shift from control to victim. I let him finish. Then I said, healthy people don't threaten housing access because dinner ran late. Silence. He looked at me like I'd spoken in a language he didn't recognize. That's not what I did. It is. Monica cleared her throat softly. Kyle, you did say that, she murmured. He shot her a look. Don't start. Rachel spoke next. Quieter, but steadier. Are you serious about calling off the wedding? She asked me. I didn't hesitate. Yes. Kyle let out a sharp breath. You don't get to just decide that. I do, I said. And then I stood up, walked to the counter, picked up the binder, and handed it to him. The wedding plans, the schedules, the deposits, the entire future he thought was guaranteed. Serious enough to give this back, I said. He didn't take it at first, just stared at it like it might disappear if he waited long enough. Then finally he grabbed it, too tight, like he was trying to crush something that wouldn't break. You're going to regret this, he said again. But there was something missing this time. Not anger, not confidence, just uncertainty. I already do, I said. That made him pause. For what? He asked. For explaining this behavior to myself for 8 months. That was the moment. The one where something shifted in the room. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. Rachel looked at me differently. Monica stopped defending him. Even Kyle looked like he wasn't entirely sure what role he was supposed to play anymore. They finished loading the rest of his things in silence. Brooke documented everything, item by item, time stamped. Clear. By noon, he was gone. The last thing he picked up was the binder. He held it against his chest for a second, like it still meant something. Then he walked out. And just like that, it was over. Or at least, that's what I thought. Because 2 days later, the messages started. The first message didn't come from Kyle, which in a way told me everything I needed to know. It came from Monica, a number I didn't have saved. Hey, I know things are messy right now. Kyle isn't sleeping. He's really shaken. Maybe you could meet him in person, just to talk. I read it once. Then again, not for the words. For the framing. Shaken, not sleeping. Like this was something that had happened to him. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I opened my camera roll, found the screenshot, and sent it. 11:43 p.m. If you are not home by midnight, do not come back. That exact message. No context, no explanation. Just truth. Monica replied 9 minutes later. Yeah, okay, I didn't know it was like that. Never mind. Efficient. Unexpectedly honest. After that, it was his mother. Dana Bennett. She called at 7:10 that night. I let it ring twice before answering. Catherine, she said immediately. No greeting. I hope you're happy. My son is devastated. I leaned back against the kitchen counter, phone pressed lightly to my ear. I doubt he told you the full sentence, I said. A pause. I heard enough. Then you probably heard the edited version. Silence stretched. Then sharper now. What does that mean? So I read it, word for word, slowly, deliberately. When I finished, there was a pause long enough to feel expensive. Not confusion. Recalculation. He said you abandoned him, she said finally. No, I replied. He told me not to come back. So I ended the engagement and packed his things while he was out celebrating his own deadline. Another pause. Then quieter this time. Oh my God. And just like that, the math made sense to someone else. But understanding didn't stop him. If anything, It changed tactics. By the end of the week, Kyle had started rewriting the story. Not directly. He was smarter than that. No names, no specifics, just vague posts. Quotes about men who punish women for needing reassurance. About how quickly love disappears when life gets inconvenient. About emotional abandonment. It would have been almost convincing if I hadn't been there. Marcus, one of my employees, sent me screenshots with a message underneath. I'm guessing this isn't about plumbing. I almost laughed. Almost. Because while all of that was happening, real life felt lighter. I slept deeply for the first time in months. The house stopped feeling tense, like something invisible had been unplugged. At work, I stopped checking my phone every time a job ran late. Stopped calculating how many minutes I had before it turned into a problem. I took on a new commercial account, an assisted living facility that needed reliable emergency coverage. Normally, I would have hesitated. Too much responsibility, too many unknowns. But suddenly, I had room again, in my head, in my time, in my life. And then, 5 days after the breakup, Kyle showed up, 6:40 a.m., at my supply yard. I saw him before he saw me, standing near my truck, holding a cardboard tray with 2 coffees, and a paper bag from the breakfast place I liked. It was cinematic, carefully staged, calculated down to the detail. I parked slowly, stepped out, and didn't smile. You need to leave, I said. He lifted the coffee slightly, like it was proof of intention. Can we not do this like enemies? We're not doing anything, I replied. He stepped closer. I was upset, he said. I wanted you to prove that I mattered more than work, for once. I held his gaze. A children's clinic flooding at midnight should matter more than a dinner reservation. That made him flinch. Actually flinch. Then his voice softened. Different tactic. You know, I thought we were stronger than one bad text. I shook my head slightly. It wasn't one bad text, I said. It was one honest text. He blinked, like I'd just shifted the language again. So that's it? He asked. 3 years. And you're done because I wanted you home by midnight? No, I said quietly. I'm done because you thought access to me was something you could turn on and off. Behind him, I saw movement. Denise, my dispatcher, had stepped outside. She didn't interrupt, just stood there. Visible. Witness. Kyle noticed her. His posture changed slightly. Not smaller, but more aware. You're acting like I cheated on you, he said. I'm acting like I should have left sooner. That landed. Harder than anything else I'd said. He set the coffee tray on the hood of my truck. Like leaving something behind might force me to take it. I didn't. I looked at Denise. If he comes back, call security. That did it. Not the words. The implication. Kyle straightened. That's unnecessary. So was the ultimatum. He hesitated, just for a second, then turned, and walked away. The coffee stayed where he left it. I threw it away 10 minutes later. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. A Venmo request. $48.60. Labeled, half of wedding loss plus emotional damage. I stared at it, then declined it. Took a screenshot. Sent it to Brooke. She replied almost immediately. The audacity remains clinically interesting. I smiled at that. But it didn't last. Because a week and a half later, it stopped being ridiculous and became serious. One of my larger commercial clients called me directly. Not upset. Concerned. Hey, he said, just checking in. I got a strange email this morning. Didn't seem like you, but I figured I'd ask. My stomach didn't drop. It tightened, slowly. Can you forward it? I asked. He did. A Gmail address. Fake name. Polite tone. Carefully written. Warning them that I was going through a mental breakdown after my fiancé left me. That I had started missing appointments. That they might want to reconsider relying on me. I read it twice. Then a third time. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I needed to be sure I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't. This wasn't emotional anymore. This was interference. I called Brooke. Then I called an attorney, Reed Carter. I met him that afternoon, laid everything out. The text, the footage, the messages, the Venmo request, the email. He read through it all, calm, methodical, then leaned back in his chair. You've done the smartest thing possible, he said. Which is? You've been boring. I blinked once. He smiled slightly. No escalation, no emotional responses, just documentation. That's how you win this. Win? I hadn't thought of it like that, but maybe I should have. 2 days later, he sent a cease and desist. No contact. No interference. No appearances at my home or business. Clear. Simple. Final. Kyle violated it within 48 hours. Of course he did. 12:18 a.m. Unknown number. A woman's voice. Panicked. Hi, are you Catherine? Kyle's been taken to the ER. He keeps asking for you. I sat up slowly in bed. What hospital? I asked. A pause. The one downtown. There are several downtown. Which one? Silence. Then the line went dead. I stared at my phone for a second. Then I called Rachel. She picked up on the first ring. Before I even finished saying his name, she exhaled sharply. Hey, he's on my couch, she said. Eating takeout. I closed my eyes briefly. So not the ER. And not even close. There was a pause. Then quieter. I'm sorry, she said. This is getting out of hand. I didn't respond immediately. Then I said, you don't owe me anything. I know, she said. But for what it's worth, this only got this far because no one ever tells him no, and means it. That stayed with me, long after the call ended, because she was right. This wasn't new behavior. It was just finally not working. And that's when it escalated again. 3 nights later, 12:06 a.m., my camera alert went off. I opened the app, and there he was, standing at my front gate, sweatpants, oversized hoodie, holding a framed photo from our engagement shoot. He pressed the buzzer once, twice, again, then started knocking, then sat down, like he was waiting for a scene to happen. Something cinematic, something emotional, something that would rewrite everything. I didn't open the door. At 12:21, he started yelling. I just want closure. At 12:28, my neighbor came outside. Neil, retired pharmacist, still in pajama pants. Everything okay? He called out. Kyle stood up quickly. I'm engaged to her, he said. She's shutting me out over one mistake. Neil looked at him for a long second, then said, It's after midnight. Take your mistake home. I liked Neil before that. I liked him more after. Kyle didn't leave, so Neil called the police. When they arrived, everything shifted. Not emotionally, structurally. They watched the footage, read the notice, and issued a formal trespass warning. Right there, on my porch. Kyle tried to explain. Said he wasn't dangerous. Just heartbroken. The officer nodded once. That may be true, he said, but you still need to go. And for the first time, Kyle had no response. Because this wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about consequences. And finally, they were real. By Monday morning, Reed had already filed for a protective order. Not as a reaction, as a conclusion. There was no more benefit of the doubt left to give. No interpretation that softened what had already happened. The text, the appearance at my workplace, the fake email, the fabricated emergency, the midnight incident at my gate. Patterns don't argue. They accumulate. The hearing was scheduled 3 weeks later. Hamilton County, 9 a.m. I wore a navy suit, not because I needed to impress anyone. Because structure matters. In rooms where emotion tries to rewrite facts. Brooke came with me. Of course she did. She carried a binder. Tabbed. Organized. Every message, every timestamp, every piece of documentation placed exactly where it needed to be. Paper doesn't panic. Paper doesn't forget. Kyle arrived 10 minutes after I did. Cream shirt. Hair styled carefully. Composed in a way that felt practiced. Like he was preparing for a version of himself that didn't match the record. His attorney walked beside him, speaking quietly, rehearsing, positioning. When he saw me, he paused, just slightly, like he was waiting for something. A look, a reaction, an opening. I gave him none, because this wasn't a conversation. It was a record. We were called in at 9:17. The courtroom was smaller than people imagine, less dramatic, more precise. The judge didn't waste time. Let's begin. Kyle's attorney stood first, calm, measured. He framed it exactly how I expected. Your Honor, this is a case of emotional miscommunication during a highly stressful period. A wedding approaching, long work hours, and one regrettable message sent in frustration. One message, simplified, contained, manageable. Reed stood next. Respectfully, this is not about one message, he said. It is about a pattern of control, unwanted contact, and interference after explicit notice to stop. Then he opened the binder. And everything changed. He didn't argue. He presented. The 11:43 p.m. message. Printed. Highlighted. If you are not home by midnight, do not come back. He let the judge read it. In silence. Then, the security footage. Time-stamped. 12:31 a.m. Kyle arriving. The suitcases. The confrontation. Then, the follow-up messages. The workplace appearance. The Venmo request. The fake client email. The fabricated ER call. The midnight gate incident, the police trespass warning. Each piece placed down not as accusation, but as sequence. A timeline doesn't need emotion. It builds its own weight. The judge spent the longest time on the original message. her eyes moving slowly across the page. Then she looked up, directly at Kyle. "Did you send this message?" she asked. His attorney shifted slightly. Kyle nodded. "I was upset," he said. "That is not what I asked," the judge replied calmly. Silence. Then, quieter, "Yes." The room didn't react, but something settled. "After the engagement ended," she continued, "did you continue contacting Miss Blake at her home and place of business?" Kyle swallowed. "I just wanted closure." Reed spoke, not louder, but clearer. "Closure does not include impersonating emergencies, contacting clients, or appearing uninvited after midnight." That landed, not emotionally, legally. Kyle's composure shifted, not dramatically, but enough. The version of himself he had prepared didn't match the record in front of him. The judge nodded once, then looked back at the documents. When she spoke again, her voice was firm. "The court finds sufficient evidence of continued unwanted contact and escalation after clear notice to cease communication." A pause. Then, "The protective order is granted. Simple, direct, final. No contact, no third-party communication. Maintain a minimum distance of 500 feet from my home and business. No contact with employees, clients, or vendors connected to my work. Clean, structured. Over." When we stepped out into the hallway, the shift was immediate. Not dramatic. Just quiet. Kyle didn't look at me. Not this time. Not even briefly. His attorney spoke to him in low tones as they walked away. And just like that, he exited my life the same way he had tried to control it, without understanding what had actually happened. Dana was waiting near the exit. His mother? I saw her before she saw me. She looked different. Less certain. Less defensive. When our eyes met, she walked over slowly. I expected something rehearsed. An explanation. A defense. Instead, she said one sentence. "I saw everything this morning." I waited. She shook her head slightly. "I'm sorry." No qualifiers. No conditions. Just acknowledgement. And then she left. Outside, the air felt clearer. Not lighter. Not relieved. Just settled. Like something that had been unstable had finally found its balance. That afternoon, I went back to work. Changed into jeans. Met Marcus and Denise at a diner. Because apparently, canceling your own wedding and winning a protective order earns you pie. 2 months later, life is quiet. Good quiet. The house feels like mine again. Not shared. Not negotiated. Mine. Work expanded. That assisted living contract turned into 2 more properties. Steady. Predictable. Real. Denise now calls any unreasonable deadline a Kyle midnight. Cruel. Accurate. Brooke still asks if I've updated the binder anytime anything mildly inconvenient happens. Also accurate. And me? I'm fine. Better than fine. A few weeks ago, I had dinner with someone new. Ethan, a physical therapist Brooke knows. Simple conversation. No tension. No invisible countdowns. No shifting expectations disguised as affection. Just presence. That's the part I didn't understand before. I thought the problem was stress. Or timing. Or my job. It wasn't. The problem was that Kyle believed love gave him the right to create consequences for me. On command. Midnight was never about the time. It was about control. And once someone starts using access to your home, your peace, your rest, your safety as leverage, the relationship is already over. They just haven't admitted it yet.